This is Paul Jones Pride Trust. It's 28th of May 2016, and I'm with Perry Campbell, a customer apprenticeship learner at SECURTY in Lincoln. So I carried out a planned observation on Perry operating within his role as a customer liaison officer and security officer at the Woodward sites of SECURTY. Before beginning his shift today, Perry checked all relevant equipment in preparation for his shift. He checked that his radios are working, operating correctly. The This is Paul Jones Pride Trust. It's 28th of May 2016, and I'm with Perry Campbell, a customer apprenticeship learner at SECURTY in Lincoln. So I carried out a planned observation on Perry operating within his role as a customer liaison officer and security officer at the Woodward sites of SECURTY. Before beginning his shift today, Perry checked all relevant equipment in preparation for his shift. He checked that his radios are working, operating correctly. The CCTV system is in operation. He's checked the computer and internet connections are on and available, and he's checked his logbook and incident book are both active and valid. I questioned Perry if it was a normal part of his process, and he explained that at the start of every shift this is what he does. At 6 PM when his shift began, Perry is smartly and professionally dressed today in full security uniform, his SIA badge clearly visible. He has a high-vis jacket and a button cap in line with company requirements. He's completed a brief handover with his previous colleague and has gone straight into work. As a result, this is one of the busiest times Woodwards actually have with customers signing in and signing out. Woodwards is a private estate which is controlled by a security team, and access is through a gated and key fobbed entrance, with security officers actually greet and log in every single customer and resident who arrives. Perry immediately began by greeting the next car in turn and recognising the customer as a resident by greeting them by name and asking how they were today. He then signed them into the system and wished them a pleasant evening. The car was right behind it was also another resident, and again followed the same process. This resident pulled to one side and asked Perry if he had a moment. He confirmed that he did and walked over to the customer's car as they got out, greeted him in a pleasant manner and asked how he could help today. The visitor explained that he had a visitor coming on later on tonight and confirmed he was from Lodge 29. Perry pulled out his incident logbook and started recording the details in line with company processes. Mr. Mason, the customer in general, explained that who the visitor was today, leaving the name and registration number of the car. Perry confirmed the details, the registration number and the name, as it was Mr. Mason's son. He was convinced he'd met him in the past on more than one occasion, but nevertheless he logged them in a normal way and then let them know. Perry then asked if he'd like Mr. Mason, to get a call when his son arrived, alert him to his presence. Mr. Mason confirmed he would appreciate that, knowing when his son was arrived, and he assumed he'd be in by about 8 o'clock this evening. Perry made a note of it to call Mr. Mason as soon as his son was arrived and asked if there was anything else he could help, but the customer said he was absolutely fine with that and returned to his lodge. Perry then returned to his role and greeted the next customer, once again a resident, but behind that car was a car he didn't actually recognise. Once the resident had gone through, Perry then pulled the next car over and asked how he could help. Using active listening skills, as the person behind the wheel explained they were here to view a lodge today, and they booked it in with the sales office. Perry opened up the log from the site, and there was no record of any expected customer coming in tonight, so asked the customer to pull over into the secure waiting area. Once he'd done this, Perry went over and collected the customer's details, making that a registration number and explaining that there'd been no log of him arriving, so he'd need to call through to the main office just to make sure he could have access to site. The customer was happy with this and gave him his name, his address, a contact telephone number, and the name of his contact. Perry recorded all this in the incident logbook and then went into the main office and called through to main reception, speaking to the head of sales. He spoke to Diane, who was head of sales, and explained who he had waiting at the top for him, and Diane apologised and explained that yes, she knew he was arriving and had totally forgot to let the security officer know earlier today. Perry used the information he'd gathered from the customer to clarify the details of the person who was ready to come in was the right person. As it was, Dan asked for him to be issued with a temporary security pass that would work today all across the site, but made sure it would only work for today. It was only a viewing for a new potential house. Perry then went to the temporary security codes that they have in the security office, and using his information activated a one-day only security pass. He then went out to the customer again and issued the security pass to them and a site map and leaflet information. Perry took time to explain to the customer where he was going today to meet the contact, and more than that explained how security protocols and the fobs worked, that it must be returned on leaving today into the main security office. Perry then checked the customer was happy with where they were going, and they still weren't entirely sure. So using the map that was included in the Woodwards leaflet, Perry drew on the leaflet to show him where he was now and where he needed to go, which is a very straight journey. The customer thanked him for his information and taking the leaflet and security pass, proceeded down towards the main office. I questioned Perry why he'd recorded this in the incident log, and he explained to me this was all part of the importance of making sure that all incidents recorded on site could be seen not only by Stance Security but also the managers and owners of Woodward themselves. Perry continued to greet the regular visitors and residents on the site in continuing a professional and pleasant manner, and continued to do so for approximately 45 minutes when it became much quieter as most of the residents were home. Perry then transferred the information he gleaned today onto the residents board, which is a way of logging who was in and who was out on site. This clearly demonstrated that at the moment, it also logged by cars, that all but 2 residents were now on site, so therefore, apart from the 2 residents still awaiting, anyone else who arrived was more than likely a visitor. He also made a large note on the whiteboard of Mr. Mason's son arriving to prompt him, and should another officer be on site by that point. He was quiet. I questioned Perry how he keeps his knowledge up to date on processes and procedures of the company, and he showed me the process file and the policies file, which are both kept on site, and explained that he regularly reads and reviews this during the night shifts he's working here to make sure he's fully up to date with expectations of the company and expectations placed upon him. This is an excellent observation, providing clear, consistent customer service to a variety of customers, both regular and new. Excellent work. Well done, Perry. This is Paul Jones, the Priory Trust. It's 5th of August 2016, and I'm with Perry Campbell, a customer service apprenticeship learner at Stance Security. Today we're at the Ibis Hotel in Lincoln, and Perry is providing concierge customer service in line with his role at Stance Security. Perry's key role tonight is logging in and out residents using the side entrance door of the large Ibis Hotel in Lincoln. He's explained to me his process today is anyone with a key fob has got full access, and but his secondary part of the role says anybody without a key access, he can then provide any service they required while making sure that no unauthorised people enter today's site. Perry is smartly and professionally dressed today in full Stance Security uniform with his SIA licence and name badge clearly visible. He's also wearing an Ibis Hotel badge today in line with the requirements of that company. As there's a great many customers around, as soon as his shift began, Perry greeted the next person who'd arrived in a pleasant and friendly manner and confirmed their key details with them. Logging them in and swiping them through his online system activates the card and confirms they are in fact valid and current residents. He continued to do this with several customers, greeting each one pleasantly and in a friendly manner and asking if they had a pleasant evening. As each customer arrived, he asked for anything they needed from the concierge service this evening. The majority of customers were simply returning to their rooms after a day out. A few moments later, a lady arrived who didn't have a swiper on her. Perry greeted the customer in a pleasant and friendly manner and asked her where her swipe card was. She explained she'd gone out with her husband shopping this morning and they'd had one swipe card between two, but as he'd been feeling slightly unwell, he'd come home earlier in the day, and if she called through to either the main reception or to the office, they could confirm this. Perry checked the lady's name and room number and then called straight through to main reception, explained he wouldn't call the room in case her husband was asleep, and explained the situation. The room number 157 hadn't got a key card, explaining the name and details. Main reception were already aware of this, as when the husband had returned to the hotel, he called down to reception to let them know the situation. He'd been feeling unwell and actually had forgotten to come back with. As such, they confirmed that she was welcome to come in and asked Perry to escort her to the main reception where they could issue a spare card. Perry then signed over to his colleague and took the customer through the hotel and through to the main reception, handing her over to the receptionist, introducing him in a pleasant and friendly manner and explaining that he was on the phone and this was a concern that he'd actually had. The receptionist asked Perry to wait for a moment as another incident she needed his assistance with, and then issued a card to the customer. The customer thanked Perry for his help today and then returned to her room. When no one was around, Perry asked how he could help and explained they just had 2 calls from different residents on floor 6. Apparently there's quite a lot of noise coming from one particular room, and while she called 3 times to activate and found out what was going on, there'd been no answer to the phone, and asked if Perry would accompany her up to the room. Perry confirmed he was more than happy to do so, and he, with the receptionist from the front desk, went up to the relevant room. Taking leave when he arrived, Perry knocked sternly but professionally on the door, because he could hear the television clearly blaring. A few moments later he knocked again and the door was actually opened by a bleary-eyed gentleman. Perry and the receptionist challenged him on the fact that the television was so loud, which he'd already turned off, and he apologised profusely, explaining he'd been watching television and he'd fallen asleep, and it appears the programme he had been watching was relatively quiet, was quite a loud film had come on, but he was such a heavy sleep he hadn't noticed. The customer sincerely apologised to both Perry and to the receptionist for them being called out today, and asked them to apologise to 2 neighbours, confirming it wouldn't happen again, as he'd been so tired he was going to get an early night anyway. Perry and the receptionist confirmed it was absolutely fine and returned down to the main reception. The receptionist made a note of it on her system and thanked Perry for his help, and Perry returned to his station, logging the incident and the room number on his book. I questioned Perry why he'd logged it when reception already had, and he explained that the Ibis Hotel records are for them, but all incidents he responds to must be recorded in his incident log, which is a company record that Stance Security keep, and under no circumstances could he not record an incident there, as it could be challenged later on. Perry then returned to booking customers in and out from the side entrance. This was still quite a few people coming in and out, and he continued to greet each one in a pleasant and friendly manner. A short while later, a lady buzzed on the door and called him over. Perry went over and greeted the customer in a polite and pleasant manner, and she seemed quite upset. As such, he brought her into the hotel and took her away from the side entrance into a smaller area where he could speak to her and make sure she was alright. Listening carefully, Perry sat the customer down and asked if she was okay, as she clearly seemed quite upset. The lady explained that she'd been out and she'd lost her purse in the last hour, and she'd lost all of her money and her hotel card. Perry asked what he could do to help and asked if she needed the police to be called, and she explained this wasn't a crime, it was simply that she'd been rather foolish and that she'd lost her purse, she'd left it lying around and wasn't even entirely sure where it was and just wanted to get back in, but she was quite embarrassed by the whole situation. As Perry recognised the customer from logging her out earlier the previous evening, he explained he could call through to reception now and take her through personally. He took her through to the main reception and passed her on to the receptionist, who had already spoken to through the radio communication to alert her, and she'd already prepared for and issued a new card for the customer. She thanked Perry for all of his help, and due to the fact that she was still quite upset, offered to escort her to her room. The lady appreciated his help and asked if that would be okay, and said she was happy with that. So he escorted the lady to her room to make sure she was alright, and as he was leaving her, made sure there was no more help or support he could be. The customer was fine now and just felt foolish for what had happened, but thanked Perry for all his help and support. He then returned to the side entrance to continue his previous duties, which has quieted down quite considerably. This is an excellent observation of Perry dealing with a variety of customers in different situations and needs, and demonstrating clear communication and active listening skills. Well done, Perry. Hi, this is Paul Jones of AG&I. It's 15th September 2016, and I'm with Perry Campbell, a customer service apprenticeship learner at SECURTY in Lincoln. So I'm carrying out a planned observation on Perry having a one-to-one appraisal with his line manager, Anthony Porter. Both Ant and Perry are happy to observe this process. I'm understanding from both parties if at any point they wish me to leave the room or omit anything from observation due to a confidential nature, I will of course do so. Ant and Perry began by reviewing Perry's last appraisal and going through the action points listed within it. Ant and Perry discussed each one in detail and logged each one as complete. There were two open actions that hadn't been completed yet. One was completion of the Red Web training, which Ant had recorded had been planned and booked in, but the training let them down last moment, and so although this was an uncompleted action, Ant decided to carry us forward and didn't hold Perry accountable for this, due to the fact it was not his problem that the training had been able to be completed. The second action that Perry hasn't completed is the internal training modules, completing all but one of them is struggling with his final section regarding legislation for the SIA. He's already highlighted this to Ant, and Ant and him have got a training session booked in and actually come on shift for him on a quieter day. And although this is also an action that hasn't been completed from his previous appraisal, Ant recorded that he was fully aware of this and had been given clear information from Perry regarding this, so once again wasn't something he was holding him accountable for. Ant and Perry then began this time's appraisal, moving forward from the positives of what Perry's been producing recently. Perry listened and discussed in detail with Ant the strengths he was showing in part of his role, the key ones being his confidence in his role of dealing with people in different situations and staying calm in a crisis, his knowledge of the SIA in general and how it applies to different situations, and Perry was clearly demonstrating that the knowledge he picked up from completing of his course, he was now applying in his day-to-day roles and responsibilities, which Ant was very proud of him for. His communication, both by the phone with main control room and with Ant, was excellent, and his complaint resolution skills were also excellent. Ant actually highlighted a particular issue that had been dealt with quite recently regarding a very angry customer who had been on site. Ant confirmed that Perry dealt with this extremely well, and when the customer rang up to discuss it in detail with Ant, he actually complimented how well Perry dealt with it, despite the fact the customer was still not happy in general. They were very pleased with how well Perry dealt with it, and he passed on his feedback to Perry with his compliments. Perry and Ant then discussed areas that Perry needs to focus on more. The only key one on this one is the detail being included in the incident reports. Ant went through an exemplar with Perry of how to complete an incident report and demonstrated several of Perry's own. Although he's completing them all as and when required, the detail sometimes isn't as high as Ant would like, and so gave him some additional training and support on this. Perry fully involved himself in this training, listening to what Ant had to say and taking on board the feedback he'd been receiving. He went so far as to complete a mock incident, something he'd already done, adding and applying the rules Ant had been training him on tonight to full effect. This was an excellent demonstration of Perry listening to him, responding to feedback, and while this was a clear action listed on Perry's appraisal for the next 3 months, Ant complimented Perry and how quickly he seemed to be picking this up, and made sure that he just spent the extra few moments when completing the incident report, just to make sure the detail was there. While they were updating Perry's development plan, which is all part of the appraisal process, they also completed 4 sections of the Success Factors appraisal. Success Factors is a tool that Stance Security used for people to self-reflect on the areas of their job role. He asked Perry for his copy, and Perry handed it over, and then Ant, using one he's pre-completed, reviewed with Perry his current strengths, emerging strengths and weaknesses on 4 key sections, being communication, level of knowledge, teamwork and skills delivery. And they married up the strengths and emerging strengths, which generally were very close. It became clear that Perry's been quite hard on himself on certain sections, and Ant was very encouraging on this one, and Perry took on board the information that Ant was sharing with him, although highlighted on a couple of occasions that he still felt he had some way to go regarding teamwork when it was very, very busy. He felt he was confident on a 1-to-1 and 2-to-1 basis, but when the teams were operating together he was still slightly nervous. The final section for today's appraisal was setting some clear targets moving forwards, and there's 3 targets that have been agreed. The first target that Perry and Ant agreed were for him to do some one-to-one training and shadow with Terry on incident reports and how they're logged from the control room. This will give Perry a better understanding of why the details are so important on incidents. This was agreed from 3 weeks' time. The second one was some learning on employment law to follow up from what I discussed earlier, and this has already been booked in. And the third one was Ant feels he should shadow Tom for a session to deal with safety, how health and safety applies, as his knowledge is potentially there, but there's differences in different scenarios and situations, and Tom is the health and safety specialist for Stance Security. Perry confirmed he's happy to do all 3 of these elements while continuing to do his role, and confirmed he'll be booked in and confirmed within the next 3 weeks. Ant, then, if there's any other things you wish to discuss, there's a private matter that Ant and Perry then discussed, which won't be recorded on this observation, as it has no pertinence to the observation itself. At the end of the appraisal, there's also a general review of how Perry was getting on before the document was signed and completed. This was an excellent example of Perry and Ant having a clear appraisal system in place. Perry used active listening skills and clear levels of support with interactions. He's clearly built up a good rapport with his manager, listening feedback appropriately. Well done, Perry. This is Paul Jones Pride Trust. It's the 3rd of October 2016, and I'm with Perry Campbell, a Customer Service Officer and Customer Liaison Officer with Stance Security in Lincoln. Today, Perry is working on Woodward site once again, but this time he's logging customers, residents and contractors in and out of site. There's a lot of contract work going on at the moment. As such, he's got three logs in front of him: the approved contractor list, visitor list, because it's in the middle of the day, and resident list, so we can make sure that each customer or person who comes onto site is the appropriate person. Perry's not working on his own today, he's working with a colleague, Tom. Tom is the senior person on site, and Perry's working underneath him, with key responsibility today of dealing with customers as they enter the gate. Perry dealt with several customers in quick succession as a series of contractors come in, using his information list to check both company names and individual names from each person while he logged and took them onto the site. Perry explained to both contractors and to myself this is part of the process that Woodward have, and that no person could enter the site without this information being completed. A short while later, the phone started to ring when both Tom and Perry were outside. Tom challenged Perry to go and deal with the phone while he continued dealing with the contractors. Perry went into the security office, and it was an internal phone call, so he answered it in a pleasant manner, stating his name, Stance Security Office, and asking how he could help. It was one of the residents on site who had been having an issue, and explained that his intercom system, which connects to all areas of the site, including security, had failed 3 days ago and still hadn't been fixed and dealt with. Perry checked the incident system. There's no record that there'd been an incident with the issue with his intercom system. Listening to the customer explained that he'd logged it through Woodward itself and not through the security office, which is probably why they weren't aware of it. Perry took his mobile number and explained he'd need to check in with the office to see what he could sort out from us, and ask if we could hold for a few moments, or we could call him back. The customer asked if he'd be okay to call him back, When Perry ended the phone call, he went outside to inform Tom what had happened and asked for authorisation to ring the central office, which run all of Woodward operations. Tom agreed to this, and Perry then went back into the office using the internal system, got hold of the site manager and explained who the customer had on the phone and the incidents that had just been logged, quoting the resident's number and security safe code. Word confirmed he validated it was him. The manager was already aware of this and actually dispatched someone 2 days ago to do this and couldn't believe it hadn't been done, but unfortunately had no more intercom systems available as they were now all out. Perry explained that they actually held a backup in the security office, and as he was dual manned with Tom and the site manager had no one else to go to, he could go out and simply swap out the intercom systems, which was a fairly simple job, which he was happy to do to support the site and support the customers. He wasn't single man today. The manager thanked Perry and confirmed that would be really helpful if he could do that, and then contact him when it was done. Perry logged this immediately on the incident system, then pulled the intercom backup system, which is always kept in the security office. Going out, he updated Tom on what had happened and what he'd suggested, and Tom was more than happy for him to go and do this, especially due to the difficulties that the customer was receiving. Made sure that Perry was to inform the customer this was not a stance piece of equipment. Customer arrived at the customer's unit a few moments later and introduced himself, although he knew the customer already, and also introduced myself and my role here today. The customer was so happy to see Perry and offer him what he was doing, he was more than happy for me to continue what he was doing. Perry instantly began refitting the intercom system by simply taking the old unit out, unplugging 3 bottom plugs and replacing it with a new one. While he was doing that, he discussed in general how the customer was and made sure he was happy, and passed on the apologies from the site manager of what had happened. He also reinforced this was not actually a Stant Security responsibility, was actually part of the site, but he was more than happy to do so, as currently contact any members of the site. The customer was over the moon with what Perry had done and explained that within an hour of being spoken to, the security officer had fixed it, which was absolutely thrilled with. He also explained again to the site manager tomorrow to thank him for the work Perry had done. Once Perry had installed the system, he tested it by calling through to both Tom to confirm it was working and the main reception desk, which it was. Asking if anything else, any more help he could actually give to the customer. The customer couldn't thank Perry enough for what he'd done, but thanked him for all of his help. Perry then returned to the main security office using the van and logged the incident off as completed. He then updated Tom on what had happened and passed on this information to the site manager. This is an excellent example of Perry going above and beyond his responsibilities and exceeding expectations and making sure the customer security and safety was maintained. An excellent observation. Thank you, Perry.